Are you ready, kids?
Hello, it's Employee Emilion, and welcome back to SpongeComs. Today's episodes are Season 2, Episode 6, or Episode 26 overall, Grandma's Kisses, and Squidville, both of which originally aired on April 28th, 2001, a little later than most of the rest of early Season 2. This is a post-Fairly Odd Parents Invaders Zim world that SpongeBob was working in at this point. So, yeah, it feels a bit strange that we're getting this far into it, since it's only 19 and a half years ago at this point, but hey, hope that the former episodes aged better than I thought, and the latter episode has aged great. Grandma's Kisses is the former, and it was written by Walt Dawn, Paul Tibbett, and Meriwether Williams, and people don't like it. I mean, I think that there are positives to it. The guest performance is good, there's a lot of good jokes, but this isn't really one that comes to mind when I think of Season 2 as my favourite. As I said, the guest performance by Marion Ross as Grandma SquarePants was an excellent choice. This is probably the closest SpongeBob got to stunt casting back in these days, because Marion Ross was best known as the mother on the 70s sitcom Happy Days, back when it was a family sitcom and not the Fonzie Show. And I think, I've never seen Happy Days, but she gave a pretty good performance here as a grandmother. I can really tell that she's old, and trust me, she's even older now. She's, I think, in her 90s, and she retired in 2018, so if you're hoping to see Grandma SquarePants again, it'll unfortunately be in non-speaking roles, sadly. But again, she's a nice character, not as charismatic or energetic as I'm used to with SpongeBob, but again, a decent presence in an episode like this, and a scene like this. This bit in the Krusty Krab goes on for about a minute. It isn't very pleasant, hammers things in a bit too hard. It's going more for sad clown humor, it's this really funny idea that they're trying to make as unfunny and depressing as possible as the joke. And I think it's just a bit intense, man. D. Bradley Baker is really going at it, but again, unless you're a K&D operative, D, I don't like your Australian accents, just saying. Nothing against you, but yeah. But something notable about this scene is that it's the first time the production music Tomfoolery is heard in SpongeBob. It's heavily, heavily associated with SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward mishaps in Season 3, so obviously it's one of the most recognizable tracks in the show. But it's kind of weird that it first got used in this scene of this episode. But speaking of production music, this also has Pressure Point, the freeform jazz bit, and I really like it. I hope it got a lot of other people into jazz. I'm not the biggest jazz guy, but it's such an iconic bit that you can't help but love it. And also, one of these pictures shown of Patrick being right around SpongeBob is him giving him a pumpkin while he's got a funnel in his mouth. Some meme made something about how it can be like Netflix forcing gay representation into their shows, and Netflix responded last year saying something like, "So wash." And sure, gay representation is fine. Good on them for doing it. Shouldn't really be ridiculed, but I just went off on my own little tangent, and I'm sorry for that. But anyway, that's a fun little bit, the freeform jazz bit. Keeps the story going. That's the best thing a joke can do. And I like how I think SpongeBob there said that a man's gotta do what a man's gotta do. Kinda reminds me of a baby's gotta do what a baby's gotta do from Rugrats. I think that this episode does lose a lot of its appeal as you get older. Like, it's squarely a kid's episode of SpongeBob. It deals with kids' issues, and as an adult, you're generally going to be drawn more to episodes like Squidville, Pizza Delivery, Idiot Box, than you are to this episode. Because having to learn to be your own man and be responsible is pretty useful, but you don't really need it a whole lot when you're at my age, say. So, not much else to talk about with this episode, and I'm only 5 minutes in. This is going to be a pretty boring commentary. I mean, I think that it is pretty funny. I mean, aside from freeform jazz, I think that my favorite bit of this episode is Grandma SquarePants describing this horrible, traumatizing car trip, and SpongeBob replying, "Tell me more stories about when I was a baby." Like, it's a very well hidden dark joke because you're hearing SpongeBob lick the spoon over it. And it comes pretty early into the episode, so it gives off some vibes that maybe Grandma SquarePants isn't all she's cracked up to be, but it comes into this weird interpretation of the episode that Grandma's not just this naive grandma, she's actively trying to make SpongeBob feel bad for being an adult, which I think isn't the greatest interpretation of her character, but there are some signs hinting to it, like the way she treats Patrick in direct contrast to her own grandson. And anyway, the way Patrick acts in this episode, I've seen worse. It could be Valentine's Day, but yeah. It's another example of them going a bit overboard with the themes expressed of growing up. Patrick just does a complete 180 on SpongeBob, and then, after a while, he slowly disappears from the episode. And I also kind of try to lose focus in my eyes when that shot of him chewing comes up. Yeah. But I mean, even here, it can be funny sometimes. Like when SpongeBob's doing the deep voice and saying that a man's gotta do something. And then he's like very squeaky and quiet when whispering to Patrick. I like that. Also, screw this episode for thinking that cookies are just for adults. I think at this point it's just going for an absolute extreme for these measures. Though, benefit of the doubt, I've never had steamed coral, so maybe it's pretty good. Maybe it's like the broccoli of SpongeBob, something that the media tells you to hate, but you can't really hate. Love the idea of a sea leprechaun. I mean, it's no sea bear, but could have been expanded upon. And what kind of job does Grandma SquarePants expect from SpongeBob at the Krusty Krab that would require that much words? 1,000 words in 1,000 pages. That adds up to a magic number, but I think that, in my experience, this is the first season 2 episode that appears on my old worst list. It's at number 4, so yeah, judging by the high quality of this season, this is one of the more average affairs, and yeah, I don't hate it. It's got good stuff going for it, good jokes, a decent message that they're going for sometimes, but overall, could be a lot funnier, could be a lot more focused, because a lot of story beats just aren't resolved. Like, it ends on a nice enough note, but want to know the story of Mr. Stuffykins more than I want to know what Patrick did after his nap. He went through a pretty heavy nap for needing to go through all that SpongeBob crying. Wonder what that gnome's doing carrying that lampshade. What's his life like? And I think that this is one of the absolute slowest jokes in pre-movie SpongeBob. Like, it's up there with the sleeping with Patrick in Home Sweet Pineapple in terms of how drawn out it is. But it has a neat little payoff with SpongeBob just throwing the door open and his sideburns coming off. I think that's another thing that keeps the episode rather memorable in a positive way for me. The whole thing with the sideburns. Don't know if I'd call it a set piece, but it's a distinct visual addition to this episode that helps keep it fresh in your mind, you know? So yeah, we've got about another minute to go, and I've completely run out of things to say. Wonder what the story is behind SpongeBob's boo-boo there. Did he shut the door too hard, or did he slam it open too hard? You're gonna have to get used to this a lot once I get to season 4 or 5 SpongeComs, just having to watch SpongeBob cry. For as misguided as Grandma SquarePants is, I'm happy that she doesn't just snap at SpongeBob in this moment. She just slightly pinches his mouth. Also a weird thing with SpongeBob's eyes, they were same color as his tears. Wonder why Grandma didn't just kiss him there in the first place. And I also wonder why it ends with Squidward and the gang still laughing at him. Like, that's the main problem that SpongeBob had to deal with in this episode, and it ain't resolved. So, yeah, a bit iffy, but not the worst thing in the world. Squidville was written by the Power Trio, Aaron Springers, C.H. Greenblatt, and Meriwether Williams. These are my 3 favorite SpongeBob writers, as I've been over before, and this gets things off to a very nostalgic start. The old reef blower thing. I do really like the reef blower as a set piece in its original episode. It had a lot of useful potential, and this episode unlocks it. Because there is some mayhem that goes around here, and it's way more entertaining than the original Reef Blower episode, if I'm being completely honest. Oh, reef blowers can suck. That's something that was in the original episode, but kind of sticks out to you now. Another thing that I really like about the reef blower thing here is that the original music from that older episode is used, but it keeps getting faster and more chaotic. This is another thing that feels like season 1, the music, because, again, some new tracks are introduced here, but they have a lot of fun playing around with it, speeding it up, slowing it down. I'll get to that with the big montage in the middle of the episode. Wonder how that logic works, Squidward getting his face stuck in the house while it's... Is this Portal? It's probably Portal. There are quite a number of memes stemming from this episode. It's a pretty memorable one. I just talked about how Grandma's Kisses is one of my least favorite episodes of season 2, but this is one of my absolute favorites. It was an honorable mention for the best on that countdown, and I have a lot more respect for it than a lot of the other episodes at the top of that list. It's just an inherently funny idea for an episode that's also incredibly deep and meaningful and introspective of Squidward's character, so I can totally get why people come back to this one over and over again to understand Squidward's life and his experiences and who he is as a character. And of course, they make a lot of good jokes about it. Like that big old rant and the fact that the guy on the TV is doing the exact same thing, well, ranting about the exact same thing, and Patrick kind of being a bit clueless and not understanding why Squidward wants to stay on that channel. He hates it. Big old meme from back in the day. People would put all sorts of different videos on there. Also, like the guy asking if Squidward has or ever been a member of an octopus. Sorry, sponge. It's a weird reference to make, but it helps make Tentacle Acres, not Squidville, seem like this weird place that's too good to be true. Like, they've even got a rainbow there. Can't say that about Conch Street. And I've totally been to villages and places and districts like this where almost every house looks about the exact same. Again, it's probably a me thing, but unless your houses are incredibly distinct, I'm going to find your whole place kind of weird. And something that I really like about this episode is that it gives D. Bradley Baker and Tom Kenny, and to an extent Serena Irwin, a big workout to do all these Squidward imitations. I don't think that we would have Squilliam from Band Geeks and Squilliam Returns if it wasn't for this episode. Because, as I've said, they were planning on giving SpongeBob a rival early on, but decided it wouldn't be in his character to do that. But then comes this episode that proves that Squidward can hate himself to an extent, and they made some good rivals with him out of it. Like, you can just barely tell all the different octopi apart. And there are some theories about one octopus with a unibrow appearing here that is probably Squilliam. But I think that they looked at this episode and thought, wow, Squidward bounces off himself rather well. Let's make him hate himself. I think I've already said that. Fun little era in this interpretive dance academy scene. For one thing, it's just really fun. But during the bubble transition, you can see a bit of a blue screen for before that scene was intentionally meant to start. And it's dated August 30th, 2000, so now you know exactly when that shot of Squidward doing the clarinet recital thing was done. And now for the scene that everyone points to in this episode. Squidward staying in place and his life slowly getting more and more boring around him. It's just a lovely bit. Great animation, great music, great faces from Squidward slowly getting disillusioned with the paradise that he's in. And I've calculated that if Squidward does all these things in the same order every day, then he's been here for about 2 weeks at this point, grabbing all that canned bread. I think that canned bread is an actual thing somewhere in Europe, I think. It doesn't taste very good, and you have to have had it growing up to really like it, but I'll have mine in plastic, thank you very much. This little bit of Squidward hearing a reef blower and going, SpongeBob? That's probably my favorite line in the episode. It's one word, but it says so much about how Squidward's getting bored with the status quo of his life and just needs something to make things different. Like, this episode says a lot about how life is perfect and it should be perfect if every day was a bit different from each other. Every person was a bit different from each other. And I think that it says these things rather well. Of course, some people get the implication that Squidward is kind of losing his squiddly identity, his bluish glow, as it were, and is just going nuts and doesn't want to be himself anymore, kind of going insane in a way. But I like to think of it more as Squidward embracing parts of his earlier life that he took for granted, like the carefree nature of SpongeBob and Patrick's adventures. And of course, they really go in depth with just how strange it is that all the octopi act exactly the same. Again, I think that even though all these characters have the same kind of personality, I like how from their designs alone, you can tell that they're different people. They've just been suckered into this weird world. I think that repeating dialogue verbatim from the earlier Reef Blower scene is a little corny, but what can you do at this point? So Squidward's just going off on his own little tangent here, and it's fun. There's a lot of great gags. I especially like this one of him sucking people's faces off. It's a neat little visual thing. And they don't even seem to mind. Like, I'm sure if this were just a few seasons on, it would be super grotesque and stuff. I think the weakest thing about this episode is that SpongeBob and Patrick don't really have a lot to do at the end. Like, they get through the guards through pure luck, and then they just go around asking people if they're Squidward. Like, I'm sure that there's at least one more Squidward, you know, there's got to be at least another Bart rule. But this joke with the oyster breath ain't too funny, and I think that the ending line is again a bit cheesy. No pun intended with this oyster scene still going. I think that this is the first time that you hear this sort of like really high-pitched, nutty chase scene music in SpongeBob. I still prefer the usual grass skirt chase music by a long shot, but this can work in some scenes. I think that this sort of works. And I like how the angry mob isn't really angry, it's just kind of peeved. Overall, I think that Squidville has excellent themes, an excellent message about making your life different, varying it up a little. But the story is great, but kind of doesn't really know how to end itself. Not as egregious as the last episode, but yeah. I mean, I think that some things about it are sweet that Squidward just kind of leaves. I'd imagine that there was probably higher security or something. Oh my gosh, I just realized that there are some Squidwards wearing the exact same vest. Maybe they are all converging into something. Again, I think that Tentacle Acres should be darker, but I'm happy with what they were able to make out of this. It's a wonderful episode that people still remember for a reason. And that was Grandma's Kisses and Squidville. Last week, when I asked you if you would try a Pretty Patty from Patty Hype, an overwhelming majority of you said, yeah, sure, I would YOLO Jack McGinn. I would, it would make me stand out, Super Seal. Michael Eurismia says, I would try a Pretty Patty, probably a purple one or a green one. Comment reviews, I would try a golden patty to be a rich guy. Ice Cream Hero, I would try a Pretty Patty, I would want to be green or red. Legarino says, yes, I would try it even if it hurt me. Carmen TV, I would try a Pretty Patty. I wish a red-blue patty turning me into Superman. Only Ariel System said, not unfortunately, I am a robot and I cannot eat food or my system is destroyed. Hoyo. Sorry about that, bud. So again, question of the week for you this week. Did you acquire a musical taste from SpongeBob, freeform jazz, rock, country even? Maybe like retro 50s music? Who knows? Maybe Hawaiian? SpongeBob has dabbled with a lot of genres, and I want to know if any of them stuck out to you and followed you for the rest of your life. Join me next week as I commentate over the dangerous peril in pre-hibernation week and the threat of arrest in life of crime. Goodbye for now.